In this installment, a celebration of female empowerment and creativity. I encountered a stand-up routine by pre-severed head Kathy Griffin, a groundbreaking episode in the Fargo series, and some sweet comedy gold from the hive of Samantha Bee. Plus, Ralph and I take in Justice League and some follow-up on disc mishaps. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on video, Fuzzy Hero.
I am a huge fan of women and the creativity they bring to bear in artistic, comedic, dramatic, and scientific pursuits and storylines. My favorite books are by women authors. Their individual and collective resolve to speak out against the status quo is sending shockwaves to the highest levels in Hollywood, Washington, and Wall Street, and for sure Justice League would have ended differently without a woman's intervention. I'm not going to pretend to understand what it is to be a woman in any walk of life, but it feels like, quite apart from sexual harassment, women face not being listened to, not being taken seriously, and inequities in pay and social progress. So, watching the rebalancing swing in the wake of a nation's efforts to silence millions of dissenting voices has felt like progress, to say the least.
Friday Night Feature.
For my Friday night feature, this past week I ran across a stand-up routine by Kathy Griffin that aired on Bravo late in the fall of 2007, which I'll just note here was 10 years ago this week, so well ahead of her disturbing photo shoot earlier this year and any commentary that entailed. She addressed a sold-out crowd at the Chicago Theater in Chicago in a stand-up event titled Straight to Hell. The title is a reference to evangelical detractors and how the wickedness of her comedy goes so far she fully anticipates she'll be going to hell, where she also anticipates reuniting with most of her friends, ultimately concluding, it's not even that hot. Back then, her focus was on such luminaries as Paris Hilton, Paula Abdul, Senator Larry Craig, Rosie O'Donnell, Dr. Phil, and Barbara Walters. She loves To Catch a Predator and the whole skeevy setup these guys bring on themselves. She shared insights from her gaze about the complex mating rituals represented in the wide stance Senator Craig allegedly employed in his Minneapolis airport men's room shenanigans. She did an incredible homage to the Ministry of Silly Walks in her impression of Paris Hilton's confusion about where to exit a stage, sort of a goose-stepping celebrity wind-up toy. That was all delightful, as was her attempt to shock Barbara Walters in the makeup room at The View, which I can't recount here without it, for one thing, becoming product placement, but it was outrageously funny. One of my goals in the Friday night feature is to track material from my classic collection to stuff going on right now, and as it happens, despite my general reluctance to get especially political in pursuit of this project, there is certainly a direct analog between this comedian and current events, and not just how embattled Rosie O'Donnell continues to be somehow. When I mentioned women speaking out, making waves in Hollywood, Washington, and Wall Street, it hadn't occurred to me before the writing of this sentence that our president is at the nexus of all three. And apart from everything that's happening during the campaign, certainly the Billy Bush interview gave us some direct insight into his regard for women. As responses go, well, a photo shoot of Kathy Griffin holding up what appears to be the severed head of Donald Trump from back in May gave us some direct insight on at least one woman's reaction to it, if not Kathy Griffin's, who has backpedaled furiously in the wake of public outrage and, according to the Rolling Stone, then backpedaled from the backpedaling. Then from the photographer herself, Tyler Shields, who TMZ asserts is known for edgy graphic imagery. Indeed. A person can sympathize with frustration. Lots of people were frustrated in the wake of the 2000 election, and the disconnect between the popular vote and the Electoral College existed but was far smaller at that time. People were still reacting to the shock and disbelief in May of this year when the photo was published, which I'd argue the president had pledged a year ago now to reach out and bring everyone together, but with Gallup polling approval ratings consistently in the 30s, that priority so far has not been evident. That said, regardless of whose idea it was, just the fact of the off with his head imagery, no, we are not there. This is not the French Revolution, and Kathy Griffin is not Revolutionary Women's March leader Louise Renée Audoux. He's not a king, and this is still a nation of laws, none of which were broken in the photo shoot, by the way. But if the First Amendment protects you from formal government reprisals in the wake of free speech, it does not and has never protected anyone from people's reaction to it. Griffin reports feeling targeted by the president and his family. She's been fired from long-standing gigs and feels this administration is seeking to end her career. I'd argue that she has certainly been in the crosshairs of powerful figures in the past and has muddled through just fine. She's a bright woman, and I predict she will figure out how to play this to her advantage. For now, it was fun to kick back and enjoy some dishy stand-up from 10 years ago and note how surprisingly fresh her act remains.
Diving into the classic collection.
I noted that while I prefer to keep this podcast apolitical, I acknowledge that I'm certainly in charge of what I'm going to highlight for my Friday night feature, and I absolutely had some shows to choose from for this installment. Absent the Kathy Griffin special, I could have explored some prequel development of Madam President Laura Roslin and Starbuck Kara Thrace and Admiral Helena Kane in the Battlestar Galactica TV movie Razor, which sets familiar cast and crew members aboard the Battlestar Pegasus a few months ahead of their meeting up with Galactica. When I saw it, it stood out as being a departure from the usual slate of shows I've been cataloging, but it also felt a little stark for commentary. That, and if I'm going to spend time with BSG, I'd rather draw from the series than the specials. I also had the IFC presentation of Camp from 2003, which told the story of towering teen dramas at a summer theater camp. Gender, race, and sexual orientation take center stage as teens stubbornly seek to craft a safe space for themselves in a world not necessarily supportive of difference, creativity, or free expression. Certainly these are resonant themes as well for me, and I loved a lot about this show, including some Machiavellian sabotage and betrayal leading up to an understudy performance of Here's to the Ladies Who Lunch, and one very supportive birthday party celebration where all the guests arrived in drag, some of them pretty seriously committed. This would have been cool too if I hadn't just done a film review last time, plus it was recorded right after the life and death of Peter Sellers, so I wanted to see what else I had to choose from. While cataloging, I did spend a little more time than I absolutely needed to with a Simpsons episode featuring Sideshow Bob, voiced by Frasier's Kelsey Grammer, and his brother Cecil, voiced by Frasier's David Hyde Pierce. The episode started out with some nice skewering of TiVo by commercial television interests, morphing into Sideshow Bob's latest revenge scheme involving an all-you-can-eat barbecue-themed restaurant and his entire family, all of whom land up in the clink at the end. Spoiler alert. Along with my cataloging efforts, I took the opportunity last weekend to repair and finalize my Touching Evil disc, Disc 70, which, however the source tape was brought in, it broke the material into 7 annoyingly small segments which refused to play one into the next, so I had to manually advance and resume the recording at the end of each segment. The disc featured music videos from System of a Down, Sean Paul, Kelly Clarkson, My Chemical Romance, Hawthorne Heights, Avenged Sevenfold, Thrice, All American Rejects, The Foo Fighters, and The White Stripes. I also have Conan O'Brien's interview with Tony Shalhoub, and material from The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, including interviews with Dolly Parton and Bill O'Reilly, which now for part of it also includes some display tracking, but at this point I was simply focused on getting the material transferred and finalized. Following that material is my reorganization of the 2-hour pilot episode of the USA Network's 2004 production of Touching Evil, which you might remember was split across a couple of discs and recorded out of order. The first 10 minutes were, however this happened, saved at the end of the pilot episode on the original VHS tape, and that's how it showed up on my discs. I popped disc 71 in and transferred the first 10 minutes, then paused and popped disc 70 back in and clicked ahead to where the story resumed, and recorded it up till I needed to pop disc 71 back in to transfer the rest of the story. Naturally, because of course I did, I ran out of space on the target disc within a few minutes of the end of the show. However, I had a second target disc at the ready, and finally transferred the last few minutes to an otherwise empty disc 70 part 2. I now had the pilot episode of Touching Evil recorded in the right order onto fresh discs that I could watch on any DVD player, but unfortunately they were still, because this is my life, broken across 2 discs. This is, of course, not that big a deal. The show existed on an unfinalized disc in my collection for years, and I wasn't even aware of that fact one way or t'other. But having gone to this much trouble with it, and the fact that the transfer disc it was on was still kind of a pain to navigate, what with all the breaks in the material, I felt like taking that final step and making it track 2 on my Frankendisc, which you'll remember from episode 4 is also home to my If You're So Smart, Why Are You Dead episode from season 2 of Psych. I set up the source disc to the transfer, and within an hour and a half, I had the complete pilot episode of Touching Evil on one disc. I had just enough room available on the disc to transfer my streamed-in copy of Trial and Error, so I closed it out with that, so it's now ready for whenever I'm able to put that disc set together, possibly as early as this coming weekend. Apart from a missing disc 362, it doesn't look like it was missing or stolen in my archive. My numbering just went from disc 361 to 363. Those are the highlights of the classic collection for this one.
Current collection.
Holding with the theme for this installment, the episode of Fargo I ran into this past week, The Law of Non-Contradiction, was an episode-length departure for this series in more ways than one. Through consolidation, Gloria Burgle is being replaced as police chief in Eden Valley, Minnesota, and she's dealing with a series of events that, along with everything else, made her ex-father-in-law, Ennis Stussy, a victim of murder. During her investigation, she discovers Ennis Stussy's, also known as, celebrated science fiction writer Thaddeus Mobley. His award-winning work, The Planet Y, took him to L.A., where he'd attempted to transform his book into a screenplay. Burgle follows the thread of her investigation where it leads, staying actually in the hotel room Mobley had stayed in when he came to L.A. before, no spoilers, untoward events forced him to change his name and go into hiding on the plains of the upper Middle West. This episode could be viewed as something of a throwaway. It's a deep dive into the past of an elderly, crotchety, actively unsympathetic character who, on top of everything else, is dead as a doornail. It takes place largely in LA, so it tracks outside the home court of this show's bread and butter. Towards the end, Burgle herself concludes she has been tracking a dead end. It's just a story, she says. But it's also my favorite episode in the series to date. Animated segments illustrate Mobley's award-winning story of an android who just keeps going and observing the rise and fall of civilizations over millions of years, always with the chirpy assertion, "I can help!" While I'd be hard-pressed to find a wasted frame in the episode, the storytelling is sparse and insular. No one wants to talk to Gloria Burgle about the events of 30 years ago, which, as it happens, don't really reflect too well on any of them. She comes to perceive outlines, pieces of a man she never really knew. She finds a strange box that turns itself off, a clever analog from Mobley's android. She finds the likely origin of Mobley's chosen alias, and she explores a realization, the seeds of which are planted in her subconscious from Mobley's story, turning over and over in her mind over the course of the rest of the season, which inform the development of her character and what happens next. Gloria Burgle isn't an upbeat optimist. She's got a lot to deal with. Newly divorced, custody of a teenage son, fighting a misogynist bureaucracy who undercuts her investigation at every turn. Despite the insight she's gained and knows she's got the right take on these things, she can't make her chauvinist pig, path of least resistance boss listen to her. She's committed to see it through, however, which makes her quite a compelling character. Well done. I also ran into the Samantha Bee Not to the White House Correspondents' Dinner from April 29th, 2017. The press briefing by Allison Janney reprising her role as C.J. Craig from The West Wing was an excellent cold open. They had a violin solo that morphed into the live punk rock performance of the theme song and, oh, so very much commentary, including a How You Like Me Now segment by Will Ferrell as George W. Bush. My favorite parts of the event were when host Samantha Bee donned period garb to roast past and future presidents, and the tape supplied by George Takei from the alternate reality in which Hillary Clinton won. Other highlights in my current collection include a panel discussion on the Dakota Access Pipeline project held March 30th, 2017 at the Bismarck Public Library and broadcast on public access cable. I see where I pulled a copy of Robin Williams as The Night Listener, which I remember enjoying. I cataloged a dozen episodes of Peter Capaldi's Doctor Who and several more episodes of Supernatural. I think I tracked down all of the Brockmeyers as they aired on IFC, but the series listing at TV.com confused me a bit, so at some point I want to double check my catalog information and make sure that's what I actually have on these discs.
What I've been watching.
I've been a bit busy to do that so far because along with reorganizing that Touching Evil episode, my current collection, disc X116, got a bit dodgy on me during a recent recording. A big red "cannot record to this disc" screen popped up in the middle of something. I was annoyed, but less thrown by it now since it's happened before. I pulled the bad disc and restarted my recording on disc X117. Then when I got a chance this past weekend, I hooked my dubbers together and transferred the programming to a clean disc. I think it included the Teddy's a Hoarder Thanksgiving episode from Bob's Burgers, so that was a fun save. Also, Ralph and I recently watched the Project Runway finale, and I guess I understand why they went with Kintaro's eclectic line. And while I really feel that of the 4 runway shows, I enjoyed Margarita's vibrant Caribbean-inspired clothing the most, Ayana, for me, was the one who really brought it. She held true to her design aesthetic and story, which evolved and developed through a line of coherent designs to a magnificent and joyous, almost bridal inspiration, the crowning jewel on a line that argued a woman's style could be modest yet expressive. That said, it was a great season, and Ralph and I are both looking forward to watching the reunion special airing later this week. We also enjoyed the season finale of American Horror Story Cult on FX. It's wild that the show finale so closely coincided with Charles Manson's death. If he died a month ago, I wonder how they'd have handled his presence in the show. Cult leader Kai had traced his movement through a half-dozen charismatic leaders, culminating in Kai's hallucination of Charles Manson as a motive force for a couple of episodes, specifically behind what he was calling the Night of 100 Tates, where his white supremacist followers were going to fan out into the countryside and murder 100 pregnant women and their babies. Manson died within days of the finale. I wonder how weird it would have been if he had died a bit sooner. Of course, the final scenes of the finale are the most disturbing. Having defeated Kai through an elaborate scheme that sprung him from prison and brought him on stage to a political debate with her and brandishing a weapon, now Senate candidate Allie Mayfair confronted Kai and becomes a hero just as political advisor Beverly Hope shoots him down in cold blood. Allie wins the Senate seat, and before the screen goes black, it is revealed that she is in fact an active member of SCUM, the Society for Cutting Up Men, the cult we learned earlier in the season had activated Kai and his followers so as to spark a national uprising of women. Clowns, bees, phobias, and murderous genocidal cults. That's one wild take on the current state of politics in America, guys. We also got over to see Justice League, which I enjoyed more than others seem to have. Since Christopher Reeve was the last Superman I saw, this was Batman's world and everyone else is just walking around in it. Affleck was better than his suit, but a better question is, where does Aquaman keep his shiny metal suit when it's not actually on him, which it isn't for good chunks of the production, and trust me, I'm not complaining. Wonder Woman continues to be awesome. I heard elsewhere that Bruce's 180 on Superman from the last movie to this one didn't make any sense, but since Superman's death, it's impossible to ignore those fear monsters are showing up in greater numbers, and it follows that he'd come around on the question. What does not follow specifically is why any of those box thingies would necessarily be able to resurrect him. You can subject a corpse to a lot of power and it's still dead. But hey, Kryptonian tech, alien biology, it's all just shut up, it's fine, and one of them having resurrected a guy, the boxes would still totally have the power required to do whatever the heck Steppenwolf was trying to accomplish with them. So, yeah, whatever. It was still a good movie with a lot going on. Loved The Flash, loved Cyborg. The writing had more heart than other DC films I've encountered. J.K. Simmons was way more actor than they needed for Commissioner Gordon, and Alfred didn't fit my image of the character. But if we're going to go by how they're drawn, then we'd need to pull in Zack from Saved by the Bell to play Aquaman, and if we've got Jason Momoa available, I'd rather watch him, please. Finally, getting back on theme here, Samantha Bee closed out a recent episode of Full Frontal with commentary on what it's like to be a woman in comedy. She said that for her and a lot of the women she's worked with, even if no one exposes his penis to you, you're still dealing with, quote, a parade of total dicks. Men who she called lady blind pieces of crap who interrupt you at every meeting and, when you do finally get to talk, forget to write your jokes down. Sentient hoodies who can watch you kill on stage and then afterwards go, I just didn't get it. Then fist bump the 11th guy to do a tight 5 on the friggin' friend zone. And all these other species of comedy penis. Now, the categories and descriptions they list on the screen proceed to fly by way too fast, so for anyone who looked away for a second and missed the comedy gold, these are the comedy dingles Ms. B and staff report having had to deal with in the world of comedy. They include Pink Floyd enthusiast, aging improv lurker, wad of plaid, talking hipster beard, beanie stand, wannabe Tosh, pile of New Balances, nebbish jizz stain, self-declared genius, pantheon to delayed adolescence, the lone truth teller, whiskey-soaked Jufro, cloud of vape smoke, mediocre manchild, fatter older Will Ferrell, craftless hack, Tim and Eric is really important to me, mofo, trust fund Foxworthy, guy who told Chris Rock he's the reason he got into comedy, the lone man who could separate the art from the person, the guy Owen Benjamin retweeted once, the Upright Citizens Brigade graduate, Flannel Farley, Reddit famous, the guy who pulled a lot of favors to get Twitter verified, auteur of molestation, unshaven resentment deposit, the empty chain wallet, guy rebranding himself as an ex-male feminist, fart joke and flannel, definitely a white guy, a well-actually statue, the devil's favorite advocate, the unweirdest guy ever to say, maybe I'm just weird, Dimitri Martinet, the self-declared feminist ally who has definitely assaulted women, year-round knit cap wearer, someone who's called a nerd once in 4th grade and never forgot it, perpetual quoter of Entourage, Vine's biggest content contributor, human Converse sneaker, human Spinal Tap quote, guy who watched an Amy Schumer special and declared himself woke, barfly with a decent excuse, if a Wes Anderson movie were a person, the future of late night, guy who questions whether or not you've really seen Star Wars, the one guy who loves Pabst Blue Ribbon PBR for the taste, mommy's little mansplainer, guitar comic who swears he's not just a guitar comic, guy with the Saturday Night Live used to be cool tattoo, guy who prefers the book to the movie, guy whose Tinder bio says comedy writer who has never written anything, Yes Anderson, David Brenner of Bushwick, Edward PBR hands, hygiene optional basement show booker, Mr. At Midnight retweeted me once, drummer for a Radiohead cover band, themeless guestless podcast host, aspiring podcast listener, human 2-drink minimum, photocopy of a photocopy of Seth Rogen, holier than house team, purveyor of poop jokes, Kyle, breathing bringer show, guy who never got over his parents' amicable divorce, human Family Guy spec script, funniest guy who's ever taken improv 201 6 times in a row, guy who thinks being raised on The Simpsons gives him a unique point of view, sentient action figure collection, rage nerd who hosts a bi-monthly at a mall bar, flannel shrine to mediocrity, career Long Island feature act, living breathing what else, ironic racist, conservative gay guy who yells, hobo roast champion, PhD in rape jokes, children's strength Bill Hicks, 6-month name from a Hat Mike comedy veteran, grabby Demogorgon who books the comedy sack, open mic host who hugs you and then rates the hug, doctor every character is a gynecologist, the only guy who really gets Mr. Show, guy who believes George Carlin just, got it, Simpsons Dictionary, Christopher Hitchens, guy who fancies himself depression's patient zero, living romanticization of mental illness, self-appointed practice team captain, woman who hates women, guy who thinks it isn't harassment if she admires you, Keith, we should all kiss just to get comfortable, white person, Mr. You're not like other girls, boyfriend who hates it when you get more laughs, host who has never pronounced a name more exotic than Dave correctly, host who calls you the lovely, one-time open micer who has some advice for you, Mr. Silly Rape, free speech martyr, I can't believe you don't like boogie nights, the guy with either a tragic ear injury or thinks all women talk very high-pitched, Star Wars McGee, the third Sklar brother, Monty Python sideshow freak, and Will Actually. So, she said in closing, gatekeepers of comedy who still don't understand why women are so pissed off, that's why. And if you still don't get it, I invite you to go away. I suppose I can share in that, mainly recognizing that other people, including women people, are people and having consideration for them. Less oogling and rubbing up against people who aren't in a great power dynamic to reject that kind of contact, and just being considerate of that. Less open objectification of people, and trying to manage to have some kind of positive regard for people who are not you, because I imagine you'd appreciate that in return. Beyond that, wow, that was a lot of watching this past couple weeks. Thank you for checking in on my video cataloging, etc. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at videofuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and videofuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated. You can contact me through my blog or podcast site or through my Video Fuzzy page on Facebook. For Video Fuzzy, I'm Terry J. Amin. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.